that everybody has in that area, And one of the problems about Iraq is that, people express themselves politically, personally, by violence. Now, up in the mountains, you have these Turkish Kurd guerrillas, who exactly are they allied to? They're making forays into Iran. Iran blames the U.S. for that. The Turks want to get them, but they, it's difficult to do. There's a lot of sort of maneuvering and shadow boxing, but actually it's very difficult to get to pursue these rebels. These are the mountains in that area are very rugged. There are no roads. There are deep gorges. They're very experienced, and there aren't that number of them, so they're really difficult to wipe out.
It's Patrick Cockburn from the London Independent, author of Muqtada, an excellent book, highly recommended to everyone. And I think you've told me before, Patrick, that you think that inevitably, someday anyway, Kurdistan will break away from Iraq and attempt to form an independent Kurdistan, and then everybody look out. But is that the kind of thing you think is imminent? Or
No, I'm not sure I said it so forthrightly as that.
Okay.
They don't have a bad situation at the moment, that they're part of the government in Baghdad, yet they have a great local autonomy. They have more strength while they're part of the Iraqi government, rather than a sort of tiny sort of dwarf-like state in northern Iraq that nobody quite recognizes as an independent state. So I think they'll stay as they are. On the other hand, the Kurds at the moment have a degree of autonomy which is greater than many independent countries. They have a larger army than most members of the UN and a more experienced army. So, they'll probably stick with what they've got at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Well, now, I think this goes back to even the early days of the war. I remember talking about this with Juan Cole long ago, that almost all the oil, I guess they say they found some now in the middle regions, but pretty much all the oil is in the north and in the south. And, of course, it was more or less in the war a Kurdish Shiite alliance against the Sunnis. And then, so there's always been debate as to whether the national government of Iraq, such as it is, would be willing to share the revenues more or less equally with the Sunnis, who, after all, don't live on top of it. Is that still really a crucial issue?
It's not a central issue, but it sort of relates to an issue of how much the Sunni get. What proportion of the national income do they get? Do they get the proportion of jobs that they think they deserve? And maybe they've got exaggerated ideas. But, that's a source of tension of, are they getting enough? And it's not just Sunni, but Shia people in Basra, and most of the oil is around Basra, the port city in the south, say, hold on a minute, most of this oil is pretty close to us, and it's exported everywhere else, and we never seem to see the money. So there are lots of Iraqis who kind of wonder what happens to this money and why it doesn't do them more good.
Well, it's a country that I think a lot of times people forget was under blockade and suffered a war even before the blockade, a couple of wars before the blockade, and then that lasted 10 years, and then another 7 years of war now. This is a country that's been beaten down pretty low. I wonder if we can just spend the last couple of minutes with you, describing, the best way you can, what life is like for the average resident, Baghdad or Mosul, in terms of their standard of living, even compared to during the sanctions, in terms of potable water and et cetera.
It depends who you are. Some people are doing better, like the Kurds, we're talking about. Some people have got a good job in the government. That's not badly paid. The government gets about $60 billion in income a year. But you still have a big chunk of the population that depends on government rations. Otherwise, they'd starve. They wouldn't get enough to eat. It's still a very violent place. There's still Baghdad is a city full of people who don't dare send their children to school because they just think they might be kidnapped on the way. It's not just the bombs, but there's much more violence that just doesn't get reported. There are Iraqis who've done better since Saddam, but there are an awful lot of Iraqis that have also done worse. And even today, you have this sort of things are a bit better, but people are very edgy. They're very nervous. Anything that happens, the shops close. They don't have much confidence in the future, and they're kind of right, I think.
All right, well, thank you so much for your insight, all your work on the Iraq War and the rest, too, and your time on the show today, Patrick. I really do appreciate it very much.
Oh, thank you very much.
Everybody, that is the great Patrick Cockburn from the London Independent, where he's Middle East correspondent, and he is the author of the book Muqtada, among others, which, of course, you can find at any bookstore or website that sells books. I am Scott Horton from Antiwar.com. I'm filling in for Gustavo Arellano. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back with Michael Hastings, contributing editor to Rolling Stone magazine.
Meet the two LA Times reporters who made thousands of teachers angry at them because they asserted that teachers can and should be evaluated based on the standardized test scores of their students. This is Howard Bloom of Deadline LA. I'm going to talk with Jason Song and Jason Felch in part 2 of an interview that we started last week about how they got inside the classrooms of teachers they would later describe as ineffective. All that and more Friday at 3:30 on Deadline LA on KPFK 90.7 FM Los Angeles. That's Friday at 3:30 on Deadline LA.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the show. It's Gustavo Arellano's show. I'm Scott Horton filling in for him here on KPFK 90.7 FM in Los Angeles, 98.7 FM in Santa Barbara. And I'm happy to welcome Michael Hastings to the show. He is a contributing editor to Rolling Stone magazine and is, of course, the author of the very famous Rolling Stone piece from a couple of months back, the Runaway General, which ended up costing Stanley McChrystal his job as the top general in Afghanistan. Welcome to the show. How are you?
Hey, Scott. How are you? Thanks for having me.
I'm doing great. I really appreciate you joining us today. So let's talk about the AfPak War, as they call it. And I guess, I think I've asked this question of others, but I think I'll ask it of you, too. Why do they call it that? Are they trying to make it one big war in those two countries, or what?
Yes, I think if you talk to any of the policymakers, they're quick to say that Afghanistan can't be solved without Pakistan, and they view the problems, or what they view as the problems there, as one. And that became the acronym AfPak, as I heard one story where the Pakistanis prefer to call it Pak-Af rather than AfPak.
Yeah, that's funny. Well, it's funny how, newspeak and military speak, I guess, and semantics can really change the character of a whole situation. I mean, after all, there's kind of a phony border in there, the old British Durand line between Afghanistan and Pakistan. But then again, the Pakistan government is not really trying to be the government on the other side of the line, or vice versa. I mean, there is a real difference in who has a monopoly of power where, and it seems kind of foolish to blur that line and combine the things. Seems like it would obviously just make matters worse.
Well, I think one of the sort of interesting policy questions that we look at here is sort of this moving target, where essentially the original Obama policy was, look, we're just going to focus on Al-Qaeda, and that's why we need to focus on Afghanistan. But then it turns out, there's less than 100 Al-Qaeda operatives in Afghanistan. So then you have to say, well, actually, no, the real problem is Pakistan. Okay, so if the real problem is Pakistan, I think it raises some questions. And why have we spent $300 billion in Afghanistan if the real problem, quote unquote, is the country next door? And I think one of the other issues it also brings to the table, and I think this has come up with the sort of horrendous floods that have been in Pakistan recently, is that we view Pakistan solely through the lens of this war on terror, when in fact, it's a huge country, it's multi-ethnic. In some ways, Pakistan could be an ally to the United States, but unfortunately, the way we sort of view Pakistan and treat Pakistan, we treat it as the most dangerous country in the world and this enemy, and as a problem rather than as a potential ally that we could work with. But you look at talk about expanding the war on terror. I've been going through and looking at the drone strike numbers recently, and in the past 2 years, the Obama administration has launched something like 114 drone strikes, which is 3 or 4 times more than the Bush administration had launched in the previous 8 years. So there's a real so essentially, what's important about Pakistan now is that essentially it's this other front, essentially another front in the war that we've opened.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the thing is, too, it seems like we've taken what's really a lot of local issues and sort of combined them all as though anyone with a rifle over there is Ayman al-Zawahiri.
No, exactly. That's exactly one of the major problems we have. I mean, the threat in Pakistan along the border regions isn't all from Al Qaeda. That's actually a small percentage of it. It's from the Pakistani Taliban, which is, again, it's a local indigenous group that we're fighting. We see the same thing happen in Afghanistan. Most of the people we're fighting pose no threat to the United States homeland at all. We saw the same thing in Iraq. Most of the people we fought over there are either from Sunni or Shiite militias who never actually pose a threat to the United States. So and as we get more and more involved in Pakistan, I think the question we have to ask ourselves are these drone strikes that were the sort of war we're waging there with drone strikes. Are we just targeting Al Qaeda, or are we targeting these other local indigenous groups that have other agendas that actually don't threaten us?
Mm-hmm. Well, I saw some old propaganda replayed the other day. Not that old, but it was the movie of the Pat Tillman story, and so they were replaying clips of right around the time that he died, and when the media was trying to use him as a poster boy for more recruiting and all of these things. And a couple of the clips of the news people, they used the phrase that, he went up the mountain to engage the terrorists. And I thought that, here in 2010, they're not quite as blatant, I guess, with their propaganda, and they don't really refer to anyone with a rifle in Afghanistan as a terrorist. They're all Taliban maybe, but right. The way it sounded in that clip from 2004, right, was that we're talking about armies and armies and armies worth of Al Qaeda guys that our guys were doing battle against, which of course wasn't the case. In fact, that was a friendly fire thing anyway, but you know what I mean. It seems like it was kind of a nice contrast, like watching a really old commercial that feels out of time, and seeing just kind of how blatant and dare I say ridiculous the lie was.
No, I think the sort of the use of the word terrorist has. I mean, it still comes in handy when essentially, as you said, as a propaganda function, when in fact, as I said, most of the people we're fighting, are insurgents. And I think it is, sort of insurgents sort of involved in their own local struggles. But yeah, I mean, I think with the Pat Tillman case, especially, you have to ask yourself, okay, he signed up to want to go actually fight these Al Qaeda types, and then I think from my reading of things, at least that he'd written, he seemed to be fairly disillusioned with everything that happened.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and in that movie they certainly make it seem as though it was his time in Iraq that really changed his mind about it. Well, so now, looking at the headlines, it's already the most deadly year for Americans, or at least casualties-wise. That may be including wounded, but still at least one of the most violent years already, with a few months to go in the entire war so far. And I guess I've heard this refrain in the Afghan war as well as the Iraq war over the years from the generals, which is that, yes, it's true we're taking a lot more casualties, but that's because we're bringing the fight to the enemy. And the more violence means that we're really making progress and we're getting closer toward a victory here. Is that right? I mean, you've spent a lot of time on the ground in Afghanistan. You've of course talked with these soldiers for days on end, right? How are things really going there?
Well, it's one of those catch-22s, and certainly the idea is, and this has happened in Iraq during the surge period. You put an influx of troops in. You're going into areas where there are people who are not going to want you there, so they're going to start fighting you. And we've seen that this year. I mean, look, the reason Americans are being killed in Helmand Province because Americans are now in Helmand Province. It's not because so there is this sort of catch-22, and what military officials hope is that it reaches this kind of inflection point of violence, you could call it, where eventually the casualties are going to start going down. But that's certainly not guaranteed, and what we've seen very troublingly in Afghanistan is that violence has been on the rise over the past 5 years. And I think if you look at what Ambassador Eikenberry, who's the American ambassador to Kabul, warned in a memo that was leaked earlier this year, he said, look, if we put more troops in, it's just going to cause more violence and destabilize the situation even further. So he was not even sold on this idea that we will hit this point where it stabilizes. Mm-hmm. In every conflict, eventually the violence starts going down. So the question is, will that be because we fight it to get down, or is that because we withdraw? Once we start, drawing down troops, the violence is going to go down because we have less troops there who are fighting. So it's a weird. I don't know if catch-22 is exactly the right phrase